Okay, and I'm missing a counselor.
Yeah, you're right.
Present. Okay,
Necessarily.
great. So I'd like to call to order the special council meeting of Tuesday, July the 25th. I don't believe that anybody had any late items. If I could move for adoption, oh, I shouldn't do that. That sounds terrible for the listening people. Adoption of the agenda as presented. Can I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Pinero. All those in favor? And that carries. There is no previous minutes for adoption, no recommendations from the committee of the whole, no requests, no delegations. And so moving on to the bylaw. So we have before us here a Parks Amendment bylaw. So this is an amendment to an existing bylaw that we have here at the City of Nelson. Staff are introducing Parks Amendment, Public Nuisance Bylaw number 3577 to Council. The purpose of the bylaw amendment is for the protection and enhancement of the well-being of the community by prohibiting the public consumption of controlled substances in city parks. Council is requested to give first, second, and third readings to Parks Amendment Bylaw Public Nuisance number 3577 2023. So we have a background report there in front of us, and we have recommendations. We do have to pass each resolution. We have to pass each of the resolutions one at a time. And
Madam Mayor, can I just maybe just add in terms of this bylaw that, we public our goal is to take a balanced approach to public consumption. This certainly wasn't about banning public consumption in the city, as we do recognize that there's some competing interests here, and that people's safety is important. So we certainly took an approach to make sure that there was certainly many places in the city that people can still consume publicly, and balancing that with that our parks, regardless if it's a playground or green space or whatever, are frequented by we're inviting the general public there to be in a safe space to to recreate, and that's the balance that we tried to strike in this bylaw.
Councillor Lockenberg. Could you read the first recommendation, please?
Parks Amendment Public Nuisance Bylaw number 3577 2023 be introduced and read a first and second time.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Tate. As the mover, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I just want to correct some what I think are pretty serious mischaracterizations of why the bylaw is coming forward. And I think to build on what the CAO said, this is not about public drug use. This is not about poverty. It's not about criminalizing poverty. This is about, in my mind, adults making choices that impact other people, particularly children. And these are adults who, in these certain circumstances, in these places, are making decisions that impact other people's enjoyment of that park. The park doesn't exist. It exists for fitness, it exists for experiencing nature, it exists for recreating and exercising, and having community. So if there's instances that are impacting that primary use of that park, then so of course we're gonna regulate it. And so we should. So there's lots of places to engage in public drug use. What I'm concerned about is that if the goal of decriminalization was to reduce stigmatization of these drugs, which then lead to drugs in the shadow, it's having, in my experience, the reverse effect. It's actually increasing stigmatization. What I'm seeing, based on the complaints we've received, is that people who supported decriminalization are rapidly turning against decriminalization as it's rolling out. And this has been a really shocking thing to me, that I've seen people who really supported the government's approach to this now are starting to question whether this is right. And then it's even going deeper than that. There's starting to be quite a bit of emotion coming in, from which I think is the ground that grows true stigmatization, which will then create the very problems that this law is trying to, or this trial is trying to avoid. So I think doing this is reasonable. It certainly addresses a lot of concerns that the public has been raising for us. It is not criminalizing drug use. It is not criminalizing poverty and homelessness at all. It's giving us, it's just us saying, listen, we're adults here. And as adults, we each have a responsibility to each other. And in that responsibility, there's certain norms of behavior. And if you're going to be violating those norms by threatening other people, which is where a lot of the complaints have come, whether it be direct or indirect through just littering and leaving garbage around, or really creating a space that goes against the reason for these parks in the first place, then you're going to be removed. And the only mechanism we have for moving people along that are creating a disturbance is to regulate the parks. And I think this is a good administrative step that will actually help us decrease stigmatization of this drug use and actually advance what the province is trying to do and what we're all trying to do, which is reduce deaths and from the toxic drug supply. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think you were next, but
Sorry,
whichever.
it's like, Council Pinero.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have just a couple issues with it, actually. I think to your point, Rick, like whether I kind of agree. I mean, the intent of the bylaw, I don't believe, is to criminalize or stigmatize people that use drugs. I think with many laws and bylaws and many enforcement strategies that have, maybe the best of intentions or are driven by those sorts of sentiments, the intent and the reality can be quite different. And there's a good chance that this will, I believe that there's a good chance if we make a bylaw against this particular thing, which is so very focused on this particular thing, that there's a good chance that it will stigmatize and criminalize that drug use, especially given that we are not putting forward this bylaw in conjunction with other measures, which I actually would feel better about. Like if there was, somebody brought up if there was housing. So if we also made a bylaw, if we were going to regulate public space, because it's a human right for people to enjoy their public space. I think it's a human right for people to enjoy a place to live. And so Airbnbs that rob people of those places to live for the enjoyment of tourists we could regulate that too. And if we did that in conjunction with this, that might make more sense. And if we did that in conjunction with an actual designated space for public consumption of drugs, like an OPS in whatever sort of space is deemed acceptable and that would work for people, that makes sense too. But then it becomes a package. And there's like this multi-layered approach to it that gives people an out and an option, and also demonstrates to people on both sides that like we're not just performing for the people that are scandalized when they see a poor person and feel threatened by that, and we're also not just blind to the people, to concerns about, littering and public disorder. We're doing both of those things. I think we need to be addressing both of those sides of the argument, and because they're both, I think, legitimate. So I don't think at the moment, I don't support this on its own. I think it needs to come with some work that we do in those other areas. And those two examples, I think, would be two examples. And I'm sure that if we put our heads together, we could think of other examples that mesh and would increase the usefulness of this, because I feel like we've already said it, like we're not actually going to find anybody, and that would be stupid and just a total waste of police time and also everyone's time. But at the same time, if a bylaw exists, I know people already call in, but if they know it's illegal, they're going to call in a lot more. and whether the police can actually do anything just because there's a bylaw or not is up in the air when you're dealing with a population that doesn't have any money, so you can't use that leverage. Like, the opportunities for this to kind of just be sort of a performative thing for us as a council, and I don't mean that I know that that's not how it was intended, and I don't mean to be flippant about that, but I think that can be how it's perceived by some people. And also, it just to not really have there just might not be that much of an effect from it, and so what are we doing it for? If it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and it causes a lot of pain and suffering potentially, and it causes people to think that we're just, kind of puppets on a string, for lack of a better word, then there has to be a different way. Not necessarily to not do it, but to do it with a little more, a greater breadth of action, I would say. So maybe not the most eloquent way of saying it, but I think I'm done.
Councillor Payne.
I just want to go to the wording of the bylaw itself. The purpose of the bylaw amendment is for the protection and enhancement of the well-being of the community. I think there is a sector of the community whose well-being is not going to be enhanced by this. We're trying to protect people from dying alone, and that is a risk to their well-being. I think people recreate in different ways, and I think there are many different, when Councillor Lochtenberg says there are lots of places, I'm trying to understand what those places are, because when I heard Minister Whitehead and our Chief of Police say it wasn't to be punitive, it was to make a place, areas that were primarily used by children, to restrict those, but to have other areas where we could move individuals to recreate in the way that's suitable to them. So when I looked at the map of parks and I started stroking off all the parks that were listed on there, there is not lots of places to me, so maybe I need to understand better what the lots of places are. And there was one other thing that I was going to talk about, and I do want to I do want to understand better, and this is something that I maybe should have done before the meeting, but why are we're doing all 3 readings tonight? Isn't our
Not
normal?
adopting.
It's not adopted at 3 readings.
Okay, so we do the 3 readings and then we come back. Because the offer in the letter at the end here from, I can't remember her name, to have more input from the health officer would be very valuable to me. And the last thing I want to talk about is who was consulted in creating this list of places that were off limits. And as a result, were we provided with some suggestions of places that, as the bylaw officers or the police located individuals who were wanting to recreate in a different way than I would normally do, where would we move them onto so that they could do that safely in community? That's what I'm trying to understand. Did we go to street outreach? Did we talk to frontline workers? Did we speak to people with lived experience of long-time drug use? How have we decided that these areas are not acceptable? Because there are just a couple on here that I would question that they're primary areas for children to recreate in. So those are my thoughts around it. In its current form, like Councillor Pinheiro, I don't support it. I think I understand where we're trying to get with it, but I don't believe this is going to get us here. I don't know that it's really going to move the needle. I think it may create more confrontation. I think there's better ways to incentivize the behavior we're interested in seeing.
Councillor Page.
Thank you. I'm going to ask more clarifying questions because everyone's spoken a lot to the values piece. So I've heard the CEO say that the intent here is not to have a punitive component. I'm wondering about what language within the bylaw excludes this amendment from the section of the bylaw where punitive measures are contemplated.
I will let our corporate officer speak to that. Certainly, we're not looking at fining people at all.
We're at the bylaw stage, so.
So at the end of the parent bylaw, the parent parks bylaw, it does say that enforcement can ticket, right? In this case, that doesn't fall under, this does not fall under that. I think you heard the chief of police here, and we all know that when we spoke about this bylaw, it was not to ticket, because we know that that would be not a good idea. It would not, we can't enforce that. It would be about education and giving police in particular the authority to move people along and educate them about where they can go to use drugs.
But that's not what's in the, that's not how the bylaw is.
It's not in the parent bylaw, you are correct.
Okay, that's going to be an operational decision from the police.
Yeah, or it can also be a council decision. I mean, you could amend the bylaw to state that there would be no ticketing, but legal has reviewed this and has been pretty clear that it doesn't speak to ticketing, which is good.
Okay, and my second question,
Sure.
or I guess it's a question, more of a comment. I was having the same thoughts as Councillor Payne, in that with the response back from the public health officer and her feedback on whether you say nothing in any park or delineate proximity from pieces of playground infrastructure or other pieces of the park, that I believe it might be prudent here, even though it will induce a delay, to not proceed past second reading and send this back to staff to both look at the wording around specifically, so there's all clarity that this infraction is not going to be a ticketable one, or that it's not going to be a finable one, or that we're going to take those punitive pieces that cover all infractions and carve this out a little bit, as well as evaluate the feedback from the public health officer and see if there's other changes that we would like to have incorporated before we proceed to a third reading. And that would also give the public health officer an opportunity to see us at our next meeting and have this discussion move from second to third. Because I don't think I hesitate for us with this to truly rush into it.
So and the corporate office can give me some clarity here. We can do I think we can do 3 readings here because it's not final reading. As per requirements, that this has to be reviewed by the medical health officer.
No, this does not, because this is
But we
not-
send it to them. We notify them that we are making a bylaw.
And they have been notified, and that
Yeah.
is where the letter that you've received today came from. That was her
Yeah. response
to this bylaw.
They have approved this bylaw that is very much similar to the Sycamoose bylaw, which was approved by the public, the medical health officer approved the bylaw in Sycamoose, which restricted open use in a list of parks for the Sycamoose area. Sycamoose falls within the Interior Health Authority. I would assume that one needs to be consistent in their regulations that they put across Interior Health. So I would think that we followed practice that's already been approved, that we can have the public health officer come, but this is something that the public health officer has already approved within Interior Health.
Can I just, maybe just clarify on, if we do go to third reading and council wants some changes, then we have to rescind third reading and bring it back. So if council is thinking of potential changes, it probably is more would expedite it by going to second reading, and then we wouldn't add another council meeting. So
And
So-
the medical health officer has requested to participate or to come to council and share her thoughts.
Yeah.
Giving it 2 readings, having her come to the next regular meeting which is August 8th. And then perhaps either you could amend it, you can leave it, or you can give it third reading. And then it would come to, depending on timing, we could have a special meeting if you wanted to move forward with it, or it can wait until the September regular meeting. So no matter what we do, it's going to take some time, especially if we want to hear from the medical health officer.
Lockenberg, I'm sorry, I just have to explain to you the rules of, this is a business meeting, and so we're doing business, and so unfortunately, in the gallery, you can't participate unless it's the will of council that, and usually it would be something that we're discussing about that maybe it was like your zoning of your house or something where we needed to have that sort of technical answer. So just so you understand the process, so this is our debate. Councillor Lockenberg, then Panero, then Payne.
I'd like to, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to address a couple of things that were raised in the discussion. The first is we have places, I'd say 3/4 of our waterfront under this bylaw are still available. The entire dog park, that whole area, all between, from the duck pond, basically from the duck pond all the way to the rest of the waterfront is available. This is focused on like areas where children are going to be. To say that, we have to permit this absolutely everywhere is again to infantilize a population they're adults. You can say that, well, not here, but literally 200 meters down the path is a better place where, we've seen examples of needle use and needles being left around almost on a daily basis in places where children are playing. These are things that are increasing stigmatization, not decreasing stigmatization. So there's lots of places, these are adults, they can be pointed to those places where they can use. They're in some cases as good or better because there's a degree of privacy. It's comfortable. It's beautiful, like the whole dog park. There's tons of beautiful spots there. I just think that in fact, what I would do is expand this a little bit, include language around the Scout Hall. That's, just to be clear, that's also another area that we've received an enormous number of complaints around people having, not that it's criminalizing drug use or even criminalizing poverty. It's like actual interactions that are creating the very things we're trying to avoid. Like, again, the point of this is to reduce stigmatization. And what this law is doing, to speak to Councillor Pinero's point, is the opposite. It's actually creating stigmatization. So I think two readings of this bylaw, have the medical health officer come and present. is reasonable, it's compassionate, it's doing something that's going to help the community, both our drug-using community as well as the people who we need on side for this. Like, if we lose the public, then we're really falling behind. We're essentially creating an opposition between two groups that need to find compassion and to somehow figure out how to be in community together.
Councilor Pinero.
Yeah, so
Give Councilor Tate.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, you can go around. I'll come back.
No, because you haven't spoken yet, so I am going to go to you, and then I'll go to Councilor Pinero and Payne. My apologies. You
Okay, I
you
actually
mustn't
have
have
a question.
waved as in your usual way.
Eager as normal.
I value my colleagues' opinions, and I don't know that I have anything different to add, except I do have a question that I think addresses some of Councillor Pinero's thoughts. And I was curious, and I know GM Johnson, that you started after the decriminalization, which was January 31st, but I think it would be important to share with folks the changes in operations since the decriminalization and the things that the city is doing to help reduce, I'm going to say, like, friction among groups, because I believe that that's important to have as part of the puzzle.
Sorry, just to clarify through the chair, you're just looking for a bit of an update about sort of how I've been working to smooth things, or?
Yeah,
try
and I
get the
think
group-
that there's like
Yeah,
operational
Sure.
changes.
yeah, so, there's a number of things that we've been exploring to try and facilitate things. Certainly starting with the bathroom, that was something, the bathroom at Hall and Baker. I think that the biggest recognition that we had there was that, it was locked at night, and it was locked at night, and there's no other public bathrooms available throughout the night. So that was somewhere that we, recognizing that it is the only public bathroom, no matter who wants to use it, in our downtown core, that, we did have experiences there where, it was in extreme disarray from users. Users of the facilities. And so we've done a couple of things. We've increased our cleaning there to the point where now we actually have a Baker Street, one of our summer students works on Baker Street, just generally cleaning it up, but they will call if it's messy or needs cleaning, and then it'll come and get cleaned. So that's open 24/7 now. The Cottonwood Park facility is open for I think it's 7 to 11 now, 7 in the morning to 11 in the evening, to, again, provide more facilities there. I can also tell you that I'm working with IH and their service provider Anchors to identify an OPS site, an inhalation OPS site that will work. We recognize, I think as a group, that everything that had happened at the clubhouse made the clubhouse not an ideal spot to go forward with. So, in the interim, we're looking at a temporary spot that can be set up in a consistent location, because currently they're using their episodic OPS. So the folks from Anchors are, with their wagon going around, and some safety issues that their, staff there are feeling about going into the areas to try and find the people to make sure that they're okay. So we are trying to identify a location that would be suitable to say, hey, it's set up here for these hours, on these days, so that people know that it's there, so there's something consistent as an interim while we look for a permanent site for that. And we're also looking at, leaning forward with how we can, understand, and I think all the permutations that come around the idea that, so what do? You tell somebody that they can't use drugs here, like, Councillor Pinero mentioned, you have to know that they're somewhere else. And I think that was, the intent when we were looking at this bylaw, was to say, well, if we're looking at parks, that still leaves a lot of areas, as Councillor Lochtenberg said, looking at, along the waterfront, there's areas all over town where they can still use it. And really the point of that is chatting with the police officers is they want to be able to just say, hey, please, can you move along? Can you use it just somewhere down the way? It's just, this isn't where we're trying to allow use in this area. And their experience has been such that, generally those interactions are very positive, and the folks move along, and, they're respectful, and so that's good. So I think generally, with that understanding of, we can't just tell people to stop doing it carte blanche and expect anything to go right in that situation. We're trying to lean forward in many of these situations to find solutions that try and strike that balance where we aren't totally prohibiting it. We're providing other solutions, and you know, all with that greater understanding of, you know, we're a public health emergency and we're trying to mitigate the impacts as best we can and be partners with both our community at large, including, you know, people that use drugs, as well as trying to support the province.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just add, because there's
Yeah, sure.
a few other things
You can add, yeah.
that we're doing. Certainly our first responders are the front line. They're, I think, 300% up on their responses, which is a huge part of our, you know, our Nelson Fire and Rescue work. They're spending a great deal of time supporting our community, and I think they should be acknowledged for that. I think our police are also very cognizant of working with community. They've just implemented a community safety officer, which is working with you know, the street outreach. We created the street outreach team, 6-7 years ago now. You know, one of the first in you know, British Columbia, I believe, to create that team. It's still fully operational. So we have street outreach, we have community safety officer, we have both bylaw and police are very sensitive to working with you know, folks that are struggling. Our, as I said, Nelson Fire and Rescue. We do a lot of cleanup at many facilities that people utilize, and we have, you know, there's a number of camps around the city, and we have worked with, you know, whether it's the CP police, whether it's our public works, you know, we go in and clean up, we do all those things. So I would say Nelson is a very, you know, our staff and our response is very compassionate. As far as Airbnb, we have some of the most stringent regulations in Canada on Airbnb. In fact, the province is looking at adopting many of the things that the city of Nelson has in their Airbnb. So I would suggest even on that front, we have one of the best, like I said, regulations in the province. As far as housing, this council supported, you know, a rezone of the North Shore Inn to provide that housing for, you know, the folks that are hard to house. We're working hard with BC Housing to get those units renovated. There's 10 units there that aren't available right now. We're, you know, as the mayor mentioned, meeting with the MLA and the minister regarding the shelter, where there's, I believe, only 6 of 18 beds that are open there. So I would suggest this council is taking a very progressive approach to working with all our community, including those that are struggling, or those experience homelessness. So we're also, you know, we're one of the 3 municipalities, the City of Nelson, City of Trail, City of Castlegar, that funded this regional study by Selkirk College. That's a 3-year study, and, you know, coming up with solutions. This first symposium happened already, and yeah, we're working hard on looking for an OPS site for inhalation. So you know, sometimes I don't think that whole package gets out there to recognize what, you know, what this council and staff and community are all doing. We have some of the best social sector providers by far in this region. You know, I think if you looked across this province, there's probably no community that has anywhere near that broad support that the city of Nelson has, and we believe, Sarah and the police chief did, visit all these sites, and, we really did look at, how do we build as much balance, and certainly this was never the intent to not, create spaces where people could use safely, but on the other hand, the reality is there are needles, I think the police chief identified that people, when they're using drugs, can leave drugs on a picnic table or elsewhere in those parks, and that's, all those things are looking, we're trying to find a really balanced approach to this, and we believe this is a balanced approach, and, when you look at it in the entirety of what our response has been.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, like all the other councillors, I'm in touch with lots of different folks in the community, and I intersect with a number of different groups, and I'm lucky enough and privileged enough to be at this table as well. And I think it's important messaging, and when I get to talk to people one-on-one, I remind them and let them know that the people that I have met here at the city, on the council table, and on staff are extraordinarily compassionate and empathetic and working really hard and trying really hard within the framework that we have as a municipal government to keep our community together and to work for the betterment of our entire community. And it is tough. Like, it gives me goosebumps, but we're doing it and we're trying our best. And I think that's important that we are able to message that outward. That's it. Thanks.
Councillor Pinero, then Councillor Payne.
Yeah, so, I mean, all of those points are well taken for sure. I think just to hit, I wasn't going to talk about this, but it kind of triggered it a little bit, is that the Airbnb thing for me, I mean, Kevin, I'm sure you're right. I think our regulations are probably, if they're the most advanced in the province, that's amazing. It's contextual though, and for me it's based on results. So anecdotally, I know of a lot of Airbnbs that could be rentals, and they're not, a lot of them. And those are all places that could be rented out by people that live here and could be contributing to this, to helping this crisis in a holistic way, and they're not. So while we may have good regulations, I feel like they're good in the context of other communities that may not have any. And so contextually, it's tempting maybe to pat ourselves on the back and say we're dealing with this, but the evidence doesn't speak to that. The results don't speak to that for me. And so I just don't want us to sit back and be happy with being the most, on it in the province. If that's true, that's great, but it's still not working. So we need to go a little further until we get results that we can hold up, instead of just the regulations themselves, which I'm sure that that's true, and that's great, and I echo that. I know that the people that come up with these things have their hearts in the right place. I just need us to look at the results and what's happening on the street as our benchmark of whether we're doing enough or not whether we're doing more than other people that are doing nothing, or not nearly enough. And that would be my only point in that. And then the other thing with this bylaw in particular being about education, apparently, mostly the piece of it is that, we're trying to educate people about where they can go and where and how to, do our best to educate people and how to conduct themselves in a public space, right? Where it's not disruptive to people and not disturbing to others, and that's fine, and I actually think that's a great idea. I'm wary of the police being the tool to make that happen. If it's just educational, I don't see why we can't use a different tool, because I know I've had conversations with our police and our police chief, and I know that they are attempting to do something good, and I know that they have a vision for the police department in Nelson that's quite progressive and I don't think negative in any way. But I also know that there's a huge history of police abuse with marginalized people, and it's going to take a lot of time for that to change, for that relationship to change. And I know that we're in the process of that, and I think that our city police are engaged in that process, and I think that that's great. Actually, every time I've spoken to them, I've been impressed with how much they are engaged in that process. But it's a process, and we're right at the beginning of it. And to have that tool be the vehicle where we educate marginalized people about where we want them to be and how we want them to interact with others and that sort of thing. If there's other options, I think that that's a better idea. You know,
If I could answer that about other options?
I have an idea.
Okay, good.
So, I mean, and it's not like, again, my ideas are not the only ideas. I just want us to think of ideas. And one of the organizations that I talk to, like, every day, because of where I own a business on Baker Street, you know, I'm not immune to any of this, or it's not like I haven't noticed that people do drugs in front of my gym all the time. And 90% of the people that come to my gym are under 18. And they're kids, and they walk by it and they deal with it. And so the education, you know, anyway, that's a whole other thing. But education goes both ways, I would say. And also the one of the organizations that I come into contact every day because of that is Street Outreach. And I know that they're doing amazing work, and they've saved a lot of people from death. And I also know that they're totally understaffed. They're really burned out. Like, the average career of somebody in that situation is like maybe 2 years or something like that, because it's too much. They can't handle it, and their workload is insane. And so, but what I like about that thing, and I like it at the expense of, you know, them, they're working really hard, and I really appreciate that work, because I understand how totally devastating it can be. But, like, if we give them some help, then why can't they be the vehicle by which we tell people, you know, we educate people on both sides of that spectrum, you know, what being a responsible citizen in public looks like on both sides, and having them have you know, another 2 people or something like that. If we can, as a city, find some funding for those people, whether it's us funding them, and maybe that's not how it works, but advocating for funding for that group, that to me goes into this package where this bylaw makes sense in some ways, maybe, or maybe it's not needed, but it's a holistic approach, and it's housing, and it's education, and it's groups like Street Outreach that are doing the work right now and are saving people right now. And it's also not being completely blind to the fact that, like, we've got years and years and years of a terrible relationship between the police and marginalized people, and police and drug users in particular. Like, drug use was illegal until
January the
last year.
31st. January 31st.
So, like, they've actually
What do you call
been
drugs?
at odds with each other until, you know, 3 months ago. And it's a hard thing to come out of for both parties. I've talked with the police too. They're like, oh, what do we do now? Like, we've been doing this my whole career. I've been arresting people, and now I can't do it. I don't know what to do. They're in a process, and I think we need to recognize that this process is long, and I need to recognize where we are in the process if we're going to have a positive effect right away in the short term. And it's important that we do that, because there's people there's people dying right now, and I just want to say also that I have a lot of education myself that I need to do around this. I don't understand drug use. It's never made any sense to me. I'm not a drug user. I'm not, I don't think it's actually really hard for me to get my head around the fact that we're like saying it's okay to use drugs all the time, wherever. It's hard for me. And yet I'm trying to like figure it out, because the cost of not figuring it out in some way that makes sense and is good for people, like people are paying that cost, and I'm fortunately not one of those people right now, but I see it, So I know we're not all on the same page in that regard, but I just want to say that I'm not necessarily on that same page either. I'm just looking at the thing, and it's like, you got nowhere to live, you've got nowhere to go, you've got a terrible relationship with the police, and now the police are empowered to tell you what to do even more. And I just see that not being helpful in the long run.
So if I could
You may.
give
Sorry.
some clarity to that. So to start with, about funding for street outreach or whatever. So while I don't sit here every day and tell you what I do all day long, but there's not a day that I am not probably engaging with somebody around the issues that Nelson is facing, the region is facing, and the province is facing. We have the fentanyl epidemic here in British Columbia. We trump any other province in Canada. I don't know why, but we do. After 35 years in healthcare, I kind of got a feel for this. I might not be on the trenches on the street, but I have dealt with people with mental health problems, with brain trauma, with addiction problems for 35 years in my career. I've been advocating for more funding to come to these organizations so that they can staff properly. Staff burnout is huge in all aspects of healthcare. Frontline healthcare is especially brutal. I fully acknowledge that. And we need to have more staffing, and I've been delivering that message to every minister that is related in any way to the delivery of healthcare. And I think that that's a message that we have to keep working on. This idea that people are sitting around and writing grants, wondering whether or not their program is going to be around in another 3 months, is, let's just face it, it's bullshit. These are just not only in the healthcare sector, but we have a lot of programs like this where people spend a lot of time when they could be actually doing work, writing grants. We do that in the city. We have a lot of very expensive staff writing grants, when if we could have a consistent stream of funding, we could actually do the things that we wanted to do. So I hear you on that in terms of, yeah, street outreach would be great. This bylaw, it doesn't, a bylaw, any of our bylaws doesn't just float out there in space. We need to have a bylaw that people can see, yeah, there's some substance to this. This is a good bylaw. We would expect street outreach to be educating people. You don't go and sit on the beach at Lakeside or on the teeter-totter and use your drugs. I mean, it's part of everybody's job. It's part of my job when I'm on the street. I've gotten to know way more homeless people in the last year than I'd ever thought I would know. There's been ones that have been here for forever, like I have been, and so you know all of the regular Nelson ones that have been here for 20 years. But it's just that they understand that, and they probably don't want to use there. And if they know that there's an option, bylaws are not all about police. Bylaws in Nelson, for the most part, I think for the whole part, are complaint driven. So Councillor Tate has to be down at the park with her kids and then phoning to make a complaint.
Councillor Tate always speaks to people first.
Yeah. So that goes through dispatch. So it could go, it goes to bylaw. It could be going to the CSO office. It shouldn't be going to police. The fact that somebody is open using in a place that we designate as a place that maybe isn't the best place to use doesn't trigger a lights and sirens police call. So it's not going to be police that interact with these people every time. And so I think that's an important thing, is that they're not going to be the ones. I do know that police, I mean, I get the lucky job of being the chair of the police board too, so don't think about this more than I'm at it all the time, is that they have cards. And I'd imagine that part of the education will be, if it was police that came, and I'm sure the CSO officers will have them, and maybe Bylaw even has them, they have little cards. And it's just like, here's a number too if you need some help. Because the whole idea here, we always hear about, the idea is that you don't want to stigmatize people. You don't want people to be at home because you want to try to create some kind of linkage. So there is this education, there's this information, there's this card that can be given out that also says, when you're ready, you can call this number or, find some outreach. So there's a number of these things in process, and it's hard as counselors, I think we're all challenged. I'm challenged as the mayor to understand as I said to Cheryl Down the other day on the street talking about things, and she's the executive director of Anchors, is that this is a big, huge, really nice onion. And it's got a lot of layers. And you're not going to get through them all. But we have to slowly try to peel it for the benefit of everybody in our community. Nobody should die. Everybody should be safe. This isn't being written to give police some kind of tool to enforce. I think we're trying to find common ground. The other thing here, let's not lose sight on, is the government has heard loud and clear, not just from the city of Nelson, but from every municipality in British Columbia, that decrim in its current form does not work. I can tell you that the provincial government has no intention of backpedaling and eliminating their 3-year trial. But they are going to look at modifications because you do everything with the best of intent. We are going to do this bylaw, or maybe we're going to just set it on fire, whatever we're going to do with it. We do it with the best of intent. Oftentimes, there is unexpected consequences. There was unexpected consequences when the provincial government brought in decrim in the form it was in. They've now seen that there's consequences, and they are going to be reviewing it. The question here is just the time stamp on when their review will be completed. And what I heard distinctly from the Minister of Public Safety was he gets the parks and public playgrounds and recreational facilities. He clearly sees that. When I talk to the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, she said, decrim was about possession. It didn't mean, and this is what she said in the meeting, that you can just use it anywhere. That's the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. So when I hear that coming from two of the key proponents of where we are sitting today, it raises the question that, in my mind, that what we're trying to do here is not a bad thing. We're not trying to pit one group of people against the other. What I can tell you in Nelson right now is there is a significant compassion fatigue because people that I know that have been long-term advocates are not such good advocates anymore, which is really surprising to me. And so, again, this is not done with any malintent. If we do go ahead at some point here in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, and actually put in a bylaw that looks like this, considering parks, we haven't banned this on Baker Street. We haven't banned it in, what is this, like less than 1% of the town. I mean, all of our park system is only 5% of Nelson. I just want to be cautious, and I realize that you're all passionate. I'm passionate about it too. But there's been a lot of work that's gone on, and I know that sometimes as council you feel that you don't, well, none of us will ever have all the information, but I just want you to know that I have been trying to balance all these competing issues, and when I hear you speak and talk about your concerns, is that I think there's work being done. We're trying to advocate. We've never shut the door on BC housing. We're having those discussions. We're having those discussions with our regional partners about making sure that there's housing in the whole region. Because you know what? If I live in Castlegar, I want to live in Castlegar. I don't want to have to come and live in Nelson because it's the only place that has appropriate housing for me, right? I want to live in my home community. These are all things. So I don't think we're trying to make any consequences with this bylaw. And so I just hope that that's something that eases some of your concerns. I mean, you've brought up some excellent points that I've noted here, but we're continuing to work, I think, as best as we can in a positive direction. Councillor Payne, you're next.
Can I ask what the hours are that the community safety officers are working?
We haven't got that quite finalized. At this point, the community safety officers haven't had all of their training. They are working day shift. They're doing a lot of work currently at the station. I mean, that's where they're coming out of. So there are 2 of them, and I think that once they have all their training completed, they will try to work sort of extended hours of the day. I cannot tell you definitively what their hours of work are.
So it's not the intention Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, similar to what a bylaw officer works?
No, I believe there could be some variability in what their hours might be, but it's not gonna be 11 at night till 4 in the morning, right?
And if I could add a second, so the Ministry of Public Safety is doing policy work around this and bringing legislation forward in the fall legislation that may cover this. Is there any reason not to, if we're only going to do 2 readings and then move it to the next and then a vote, especially with the break in August, is there, I'm not sure why we wouldn't just wait until we see what the province is doing, especially in light of the fact that one of the things that we've all discussed is critically important is that education around what is the best way to do this for all concerned, and I think Councillor Lochtenberg said when he's approached individuals, they've been pretty, and I know the police have said this as well, they've been pretty cooperative in moving forward. So do we need a bylaw to make that happen, or can we start with the education piece and give out, I got one of the little cards for everybody to look at that the police do give out, and just utilize this intervening period until the province comes out with their legislation.
The problem isn't, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, having the bylaw allows you to have that interaction to a certain extent. But there's no bylaw, if I'm sitting in the playground part of Lakeside Park using my drugs at the current time, there is nothing that I can, like, I shouldn't be interacting with that person. There's no, I know that sounds crazy. It's like when we had the no dogs on Baker Street and we didn't have a bylaw. So if a dog was on Baker Street, we didn't really have a way to, like, it's the way bylaws are. It's like you need that, the bylaw creates the ability to take some action. When you don't have the bylaw, there is no action. That's why you can use anywhere currently now in the city. And there's no, you phone bylaw, there's no bylaw. I can just use.
No anti-idling bylaw, but when I see someone idling, I do go over and say to them, is there a reason? And many times
a lot of people might not have comfort going to tell somebody that's using drugs.
I hear what you're saying, but it sounds like Councillor Tate and I
but that's
be able to have that conversation
Yeah.
with Councillor Lochtenberg as well. Maybe we should be branching out, bring some friends. I don't know. You got the card. It's right here.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember is, that complaint has to be of a serious nature that we're going to have, staff go down and interact. So these are generally where someone is not being considerate of others, right? If someone's considerate of others, then you're not getting, you yes, we have a few people that will complain about everything, but we have a few people that complain about everything about other things. We don't just send bylaw officers and police officers and CEOs up to, for things that seem pretty frivolous. So, that's one of the reasons why it allows you to deal with when that education piece just isn't resonating, that, they have a little bit more, no, you must move on. And that's, I think you heard from the police chief, 95% of the time, people are cooperative, they understand, they get it. And as the mayor said, a police officer cannot just come up to you and I think Councillor Panario made that same point. Our police are very sensitive to not infringing on people's rights and are very sensitive. In fact, I think you heard our police chief say they don't respond to first responder calls. They did in the past, and they saved lives in the past. They don't do that now because of this stigma, which is the opposite of, a police officer is somehow this person, which isn't our officers. And, there's just as much stigma on that other side as there is for this. And, I agree it was, this relationship, and that's but you need to break down that stigma on both sides, that, our officers were saving lives out there, and they backed off totally now. Only our fire respond to those overdoses now. So as the mayor said, on one hand, it does create that opportunity, whether it's a bylaw officer, a CEO, a police officer, and everybody knows our police officers, we are shorthanded. They're dealing with significant issues, and they're not going down to a park because someone is sitting there on a picnic table and not causing any concern, and somehow we got 3 police cars showing up and taking a aggressive approach. That's just not happening.
Councillor Lockenberg and then Councillor Page, and then maybe we'll test the House.
I was going to say a couple things. I really appreciate this conversation, this discussion. I think what's clear to me is that we are wrestling with a challenging problem and trying to do what's best for everyone, including and especially the vulnerable and the user population. One of the things that I really like about a bylaw is that it does more than just, it's not about punitive, it's a community agreement. We have bylaws related to zoning, we have bylaws related to parks and how we manage things. It's kind of an agreement we make to each other about the community that we live in. And so a bylaw like this, it says, this is as a community, given the environment, given decrim and given everything, this is where you can use, as much as it's saying this is where you can't use or shouldn't use. And I think in that clarity, for everybody, it's good for everybody, especially given how not onerous this bylaw is. To say that you can't be doing it in a playground, but there's a place 200 meters down the path, down the road, that's really nice, and it's not like in a back alley, but it's on the waterfront, it's in a park, there's benches or whatever, to me will help, again, lower the temperature across the community, will help, destigmatize, especially if you can imagine, and this is what I think, this is not theoretical. We're getting complaints today, and the chief reported that he's dealing with multiple calls a day from people that are dealing with interactions or conflicts, and they're, like the mayor said and like the CEO said, they don't know what to do. We don't have a community agreement about where you should or shouldn't be using. So the response and the source of that conflict is one side saying this is not an appropriate place to be leaving needles or doing drugs, and the other side saying yes it is. There's no agreement, there's no rules, nobody's telling me, or the community hasn't said I shouldn't be using here, therefore the community is giving me permission to use here. Whereas with this bylaw, it sets some clear, boundaries for how we should deal with something that's creating a lot of conflict in the community. I just want to stress again that I think if we don't do anything, if we don't, that legislation that might come before the province might be tabled in the fall. It might not actually get to any sort of implementation or resolution, who knows, by 2024 or beyond, if at all. I think what this does is it sets a clear set of guidelines or agreements with the community about where public use makes sense. I would just say one last thing, kind of a housekeeping thing almost, if I may. The term illicit drugs, and I should have raised this earlier, I think there's, including MDMA in that, in the definition of illicit drugs, really stands out and maybe is a little ham-fisted. I almost think it should be removed from it because, it's not smoking, it's not injecting, it's often used as a treatment for addictions. It sort of jumps out as a little.
It's one on the list, though.
Yeah, I
Is
think
it
it
It's
comes
one on the list,
the
it's one
shared
on the
definition?
decrim list.
Right.
That
so
we've
we're just
asked
sort
for
of
the exemption, so what the
grabbing
province has
it.
asked is the
Okay.
exemption from the illicit drug list
Okay.
federally, that's on the exemption list.
Sure. Then
So
we're
that's
just
why it's
being
there.
clean. Okay. So then, yeah, just to say again, I really think 2 readings of this starts to shows the community that we're doing something. We take their complaints, their concerns seriously. It helps to lower the temperature across the community. It helps put us on a pathway to destigmatization, and it gives everyone some clarity about a really difficult issue.
Councillor Page.
Thank you. So, at issue here, first and foremost, is supporting and helping people get the care that they need, as well as doing that in a way that is respectful of the community at large and contributes to the overall well-being. In that nature, I would like to propose an amendment to the motion on the floor. I would like us to amend the amendment to the bylaw to remove the linkages through wording to any punitive measures as it stands now. To remove linkages to punitive measures as it stands now. We don't have wording specific that would say you are not capable of getting a $10,000 fine or 6 months in prison. We need to segregate this away from that.
I didn't say one thing.
Oh,
The ticketing.
yeah.
And that is that there's no fine defined in the bylaw enforcement bylaw. So there needs to be, it says in the parks bylaw that you're subject to a fine,
Yeah.
but the fine would be identified in a different bylaw in order for
We're
there
not
to
bringing the
actually.
fines and charges by law.
Can we
forward.
clean up language around that before third reading?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm asking for.
okay.
I would like to amend the prohibited locations to include specified meters from the Scouts Hall.
I'll accept that amendment as
Well, this is one.
I mean, Scotts Hall isn't in it, but yeah. This is, yeah.
Third reading.
Yeah.
If we pass it at 2, then we can bring these changes.
Yeah, and so you
So
would
just
adopt it
list them.
As amended.
as amended at
That's
third
what-
reading.
Yeah,
Okay.
third reading, you would put,
Okay.
like, so just, we can put in what we want to have changed, and then it
Yeah,
would come back
that's-
at
okay,
third.
so that's what I'm
We don't have to
doing.
do it now.
Okay, I get it. So that's what I'm doing now is those
Yeah,
2 things.
making the list, yeah.
With the intent of allowing it through first and second reading, with the intent that we would bring it back for third. I am open to a special meeting if we want to in short succession after that to do adoption, once we've had the public health officer here.
I would also like to see some consultation with,
I actually have that on my
workers
list,
around it.
so if you want, I'd be like into that.
I think we're making decisions about people, like, nothing about us without us. We are not even close.
So to that question, how feasible would it be to have a consultation with the impacted communities between now and the 8th for feedback? I know it's.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult, I think it would be difficult to commit to saying that we would be able to do like a comprehensive consultation. You know, I know that I could talk to some of, the people that I work with, but, as far as a consultation, that's a very quick turnaround. Especially given the summer, right, holidays and such.
It's just, not that it puts your mind at ease, Councillor Page, but when I was in a meeting at the Fentanyl Task Force meeting 2 weeks ago, and the topic came up about bylaw, it was actually the lead from Redone who said, well, make sure you read the Sycamoose bylaw. And that's basically what we've formatted this on. So I don't think we're far away from what would be acceptable, but I'm sure there will always be those that will find that anything we do is, again, it's the consequences piece. You can weigh it however you want, but it was interesting that specific bylaw was brought up by Holly from Redone in the conversation.
So I think, Chris is working closely with sort of the service provider, so certainly getting that feedback. I know he's met with the street outreach workers and that sort of thing, so certainly we are being sensitive to those folks that are working with that population to get their sense of, are we being finding that balance. They're certainly going to come from the aspect of as widely as possible. Clearly, we've heard from others in the community that would like to narrow it as much as possible. So, we haven't gone out and consulted with the broad public either. So, we're doing our best from what we've heard so far, but certainly Chris can, get some additional feedback from, certainly those working with the that vulnerable population, and we can provide that level of feedback. But I think if you're going to consult, you have to consult not just with the those that are using. You would want to consult with those that have children and those other things, right? So now we got a big consultation. So.
Were you finished?
So just a question and a point of clarification. Are those?
Those aren't amendments, because we're at,
They're
if we only do 1 and 2, we can add, we are directing staff. They're not amendments in the bylaw, because we're only doing 1 and 2. When we would come back to 3, we would have what we've suggested that we see as improvements or deletions or whatever you want to call them. They would come back in 3. So we're not amending this right now. We would do 1 and 2 based on the fact that we're going to do some stuff, and 3 is going to come back and it's going to look different than 1 and 2. Is that confusing?
No, it sounds great. It seems like a really great compromise going forward. It gives us lots of room to wrestle this into something that we might all agree on. And I would say this conversation for me has been really great from each one of you. I've really appreciated, and staff, from hearing from all of you. And this is all on video. So it might be worth, going onto YouTube, hitting the start of this conversation, sharing it broadly with all of our partners in the social services. So they, at least as a part of consultation, they need to understand where the rationale is, because there's been so much mistrust or misinformation that this is about criminalizing poverty and criminalizing drug use. And it'd be, I think, great as a part of a consultation to share that video and have the broader community hear all of you.
People love it when you ask them to watch a recorded video. Students especially.
People watch it because I know I even get letters after police board meetings. So trust me, people watch what's recorded. So So I'm gonna test the water here. We've had, a resolution that's been moved and it's been seconded, and I see no, if I do this really fast, I see no further discussion. All those in favor and opposed, and that carries. Okay. So. Oh, yes. And number 3, if we could just receive the letter of July the 6th, 2023 from Interior Health.
So moved.
Super, okay, moved, seconded by Councillor Tate. All those in favor, and that carries. Thank you, everybody. Okay, now resolution number 10, a resolution closing the meeting to the public. So I'd like to thank everyone in the gallery who has stayed with us till 9:56. And council's going to definitely be wishing that they had a procedural bylaw amendment that said meetings couldn't go past 10, but we don't have one. So we are going to.
It's 11, isn't it?
No, it's 10.
No,
Oh,
it's
our
11 is our
procedural
procedural bylaw.
Yeah,
I
so
checked
we are going to carry on, so I do have to ask everybody to leave the room, including the media. So resolution 10A, that is the opinion of the council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and staff and any approved audiences be excluded from this meeting, and the special closed meeting of councils continue under section 91K of the community charter to deal with matters relating to negotiating and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at the preliminary stages, and that in the view of council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. And 91E regarding the acquisition of improvements to lands. And if I can have somebody move, everybody go up. Hey, those that are still here.
I'm
can I have a
moving
mover
that
of
we're
the
going in
motion to go
camera. Is that what
camera?
I'm moving?
Yes, thank you.
I moved.
So it's moved by Councillor Payne, seconded by Councillor Pinero. All those in favor? Yes, I have enough hands in the air, and that carries.
Guess we